When we reconstruct, we bring together different kinds of research methods. So textual methods, object-based methods, and laboratory reconstruction. It opens up historical questions, material questions that we would never have access to otherwise. And let me illustrate what I mean by the students' reconstruction of powder for hourglasses. We talk about hourglass sand, but you need not sand, not the crystalline angles of sand, but rather little microbeads to flow through the hole in the hourglass. So the recipe in the manuscript goes something like boil together rock salt and lead, the metal lead, and then wash it multiple times. This seems like a very unlikely recipe, boil together lead and rock salt. But in fact, the students did that. They started off by boiling lead and rock salt in water, and they came up with this rather sludgy, very thick, bumpy lead, which again seemed quite implausible as hourglass sand, but they went ahead, they washed it multiple times, and they in fact came up with very nice little microbeads. But we decided, our method is, of course, that we have to put this recipe in context. We need to know, is this a common recipe? Is this something that was being made by other people at the same time? So they started that textual historical research. And what they found was fascinating. They found that, in fact, in the 15th century, there is a recipe in a householder's book, compilation of procedures for managing a household, ostensibly for a young wife, to collect the dust that falls from the saws that are being used to make the great marble tombs around Paris and boil it with olive oil. Again, it's a highly unlikely recipe. And then they found a 17th century English domestic recipe in manuscript which called for boiling together powdered eggshells and some other kind of oil. It really shows us the way in which artisans and others were simply exploring their environment, finding the materials that are around them and making use of them for these kinds of daily processes. So then we thought, okay, so what is an hourglass? How did you put it together? So you made the powder, you made the sand. What did you do next? So we looked at objects, and hourglasses are in fact made from two bulbs of glass, which were presumably sold in markets. We don't know about this, but they certainly exist now. They were then fastened, the sand was put in, some sort of hole was made, probably with paper or leather or something, that fit inside the tube through which the hourglass sand falls. But then, of course, the question is, how do you calibrate an hourglass? Who did this? Did you do it at home? What did you calibrate it against? Maybe it wasn't very precise, but in fact, sources from the 16th century do talk about 8-minute hourglasses, 3-minute hourglasses, hour-long hourglasses, so they seem to have been made in a precise manner. How they were made, we don't know. In the 20th century, an algorithm for how fast the sand fell through the hole was actually calculated by physicists, but there's no written evidence of how the hourglass sand maker or the householder actually calibrated that. So the students thereby established that, in fact, there were objects, they were being made, they were precise objects, and then they looked around for uses. And one of the students was a PhD student who was writing a dissertation on English literature of the 16th and 17th century and looking at sermons in particular. And she found that, in fact, sermons were timed by the use of an hourglass sitting next to the preacher. And the sermons were, of course, full of the metaphorical use of hourglasses to indicate the passage of time, the vanity of human life, the fragility and shortness of human life. And we had this realization that this material hourglass was sitting next to this preacher who was talking about the fragility of human life and the shortness of time, and the parishioners were watching the hourglass powder drop through that hourglass to measure the time that he had left. So it was a wonderful material referent to metaphorical or allegorical use of an instrument of daily life. So all in all, this is what reconstruction does. It makes the students, it makes one read this text closely. It makes them explore the past. It raises questions such as, how were hourglasses calibrated? What was the material? It shows us the way in which people explored their environment to make use of natural materials. So it really raises questions that we wouldn't even know to ask otherwise.